So Hideki, you give me the floor. You make the welcoming, correct?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Hmm.
Okay, thank you very much for attending this session, Business and Human Rights Driving Multi-Stakeholders Engagement. And thank you very much again. There are many sessions at the C20 summit, but thank you very much for choosing this session. I'm very much excited about this session, not only because of the importance of the session, business and human rights, but also we have five distinguished guests all over the world, from Africa, Chile, America, Europe, Thai, Japan, and also we have United Nations, government, academics, and CSOs all over the world. It's exciting to be connected each other at the live. And first, I will explain the purpose of this session, but I'd like to introduce our speakers first, okay? And the first speaker is Dante Pesh from the UN Vice Chair of Working Group. Okay, I'd like to begin this session, which is Business and Human Rights Driving Multi-Stakeholder Engagement. Thank you very much for attending this session, out of many good sessions at the C20 Summit. And my name is Hideki Wakabayashi. I'm the director of JANIC, and I'm very much excited to have this session, not only because of the importance of this session, business and human rights, multi-stakeholder engagement, but also we have five distinguished guests and speakers from all over the world, from Africa, Europe, Chile, Thai, and Japan. Thank you very much. And we have, of course, yes, United Nations, government, academics, and the CSO over there. It's very much, I'm very much excited to have these five prominent guests at the same time. It's connected already. And first, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, keynote speech of Mr. Dante Pesh from the UN, Vice Chair of the Working Group on the Business and Human Rights. And I would call him Mr. Business and Human Rights, who has a very deep experience in the field of the business human rights, accountability, and SDGs. So he will touch upon the guiding principle on the business human rights. It will mark the 10th anniversary of the UN guiding principle for the next year. So, and next speaker, Miss, I cannot pronounce your first name and last name, Norilak Piachaipun. I was asked to call you Pami. Is that okay? Pami. Okay. Thai is the first, okay, good. First country who which launched the National Action Plan last year, the first country in Asia. So I think she will touch upon her experience on introducing the map. And third person is Miss Felistas Weber. Is that okay? Felistas Weber. So she is a project director of the Node Chain. That is a very famous introducing benchmarking and ranking the many global companies focusing on the forced labor. And fourth speaker, we'd like to introduce Ms. Sato Akiko-san from Japan. She is a Deputy Secretary General of Human Rights Now, which is NGO. And she is, I would say, human rights lawyer and BHL, Business Human Rights Specialist in Japan. So Human Rights Now is very famous in Japan. It's kind of active, sometimes people aggressive NGOs sometimes, but very good NGOs I'd like to introduce. And the last person is Mr. Benjamin Trawa. I cannot pronounce your last name either. So he is a project coordinator Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. And also his African Coalition for Corporate Accountability, better known as ACCA. He's a project coordinator working on the business human rights. So now the purpose of this session is focusing on the business human rights, especially on the multi-stakeholder engagement, especially the role of civil society. Again, next year, 2021 will mark the 10th anniversary of the UN Guiding Principle adopted in June 2011. And it is became the global standard for preventing and addressing risk of adverse human rights impacts linked to business activity. Then also national action plan is requested to implement this plan. So in the UN GPS and NAP guidance requires inclusive and transparent process in the making a NAP. So I think will be focusing on the role of the civil society engagement. And now I think it's Japanese government is just about to launch the NAP in a minute. So we would like to learn much from the experience of the Thai government. So I think important role of civil society is already included in the GPS. But my observation is that CSO have not noticed its importance of the engagement with BHR yet. So in this session, we'll be focusing on the role of CSO, learn what CSO could do more about the BHR in implementing the National Action Plan. So I'd like to ask Dan Tepesh first to give us 15 minutes each. I'm sure that he will touch upon the 10th anniversary of the guiding principle. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hideki, and thank you very much for inviting me representing the Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, C20 representatives, thank you for the invitation to address the C20 and this important session focused on the role of business and human rights in driving effective multi-stakeholder engagement. Business and human rights is a key issue in the current context as we are turning a point and inflection for the future we want. It is a future of closed borders, conflict, rising inequalities, climate crisis, pandemics, and discrimination, or is a path of resilience, inclusion, justice, peace, and prosperity. As we reflect, there are two key commitments made by states that are fundamental. Both recognize that the responsible business is a key part of the solution. The first is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that set forth the aspirations we have for people and planet. The second is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the UNGPs, brought to life by the UN Human Rights Council in 2011 and the universally accepted framework for how to realize corporate respect for human rights. Grounded in international human rights and labor standards, there are three pillars tell us what is needed. States must protect human rights, business should respect human rights, and when harms occur, victims need access to effective remedy. The working group that I'm representing, currently as vice chair, has a mandate to promote the guiding principles. Let me take this opportunity to highlight that in the lead off to the 10th anniversary of the guiding principles in June next year, we are undertaking a new project, Business and Human Rights Towards a Decade of Global Implementation. The project, also known as UNGP's 10 Plus, will take stock on the first 10 years of implementation and design a roadmap for action in the decade towards 2030 and beyond. Our goal is to help unleash the full potential of the guiding principles to support our collective efforts to achieve the future we want. The stock taking will be presented to the UN Human Rights Council in June next year, and the forward-looking roadmap will also be launched in June at the same time as the UNGPs mark their 10th anniversary. To inform the roadmap, we are consulting with stakeholders in all regions. And as part of the global consultation process, we have invited all interested parties to participate with a written contribution. The link to have your say is available at the project website. Civil society has a critical role to play in this process and broadly for driving progress towards the SDGs and realizing the guiding principles. Civil society organizations and human rights defenders around the world are doing so by promoting government and corporate accountability through a variety of approaches, from exposing wrongdoing, pushing for national and international level regulation and policy innovations, direct engagement with business, and participation in multi-stakeholder platforms. This session seeks to discuss the state of play of national action plans on business and human rights and the way forward for making them effective. Civil society can make a significant contribution also in this context. The working group has actively promoted national action plans, or NAPs, on business and human rights as key policy tools for advancing implementation of the UN guiding principles and greater policy coherence. Both the UN Human Rights Council and the G20 have made commitments to promote national action plans by member states. Yet, beyond Europe, and despite efforts to the contrary, very few countries have actually issued national action plans. Not only have too few countries developed NAPs, but also where such plans exist, the overall picture is one of shortcomings in terms of both process and content. Assessments made by civil society organization and the Danish Institute for Human Rights have previously highlighted that with respect to process, too few national action plans are based on robust evidence gathered via national baseline assessment. While what we understand by a robust baseline assessment might need to be adapted to local capacity and resources, they should involve multi-stakeholder consultations in different regions, and a human rights-based approach to consultation, allowing for the voice of the most at risk to be heard, such as indigenous people, racial minority, migrants, etc. This is also connected to one of the key challenges for ensuring meaningful participation, as many NAP processes are not accounting for existing power imbalances and mistrust. Another criticism highlights that drafting processes have lacked transparency and clear timelines for publication. At once in place, there is weak governance of the national action plans, including lack of adequate frameworks for progressing and monitoring implementation. Yet another criticism is that, with few exceptions, national action plans are generally weak in terms of actionable steps that states should take. Inside government, one challenge relates to the observation that ministries in charge do not have sufficient political power to convene key ministries and lack a strong mandate from the highest political level to implement national action plans, actions internally. Resources and capacity present challenges too, and there is a lack of continuity when governments transition and change. With respect to content, again, with a few notable exceptions, national action plans lack provisions for legal developments and mandatory options to close protection gaps. Instead, and while they are important, there is an overemphasis on voluntary measures such as awareness raising, training, research, and promotion of good practices. There is insufficient attention to the state as an economic actor, missing the duty and opportunity to embed the guiding principles in state-owned enterprises, public procurement, export credit, among others. Critically, the third pillar of the guiding principles, access to effective remedy, has been neglected. While national action plans should be a tool for strengthening access to both judicial and no-judicial grievance mechanisms, this is hardly done in any existing plans. And if one looks behind these gaps, deeper issues are at play. One of the main reasons of the weakness of national action plans in many countries is corruption and corporate and regulatory capture of the state. If the NAP process and content do not address these challenges and is underpinning by effective political will for change, it is hard to see how NAPs can make a difference in many contexts. During the 2019 UN Annual Forum, the working group stressed that it was time for governments for more active to become and be a more active catalyst for business respect for human rights. We noted that government action was overdue and urgent to adequately address the challenges of today and prevent those for tomorrow. This urgency has become even more acute in the current global crisis. States must act to protect workers and communities that are negatively affected by business decisions and activities. While the world is battling with the economic shocks from the pandemic, we need to start planning for a new and better future, where protection of and respect for human rights must be a key ingredient of a sustainable and just society in its economy. Now is actually a timely moment to reinvigorate the call for national action plans on business and human rights, including by G20, but only if we learn from and address the challenges and shortcomings of early efforts. We recognize that local realities and context, including capacity and resources of government entities and other stakeholders, mean that different countries are at different starting points and that journeys will look different. Yet, in all contexts, there is a potential for progress when learning from the experiences of others and striving towards continuous improvement. In all contexts, two critical elements need to be presented to make NAPs meaningful and effective. Multi-stakeholder participation that includes both business associations and civil society organizations and importantly, effective stakeholders' voices, including unions, human rights defenders, and those most at risk. And there needs to be mechanisms for governance, reporting, and monitoring, for example, through multi-stakeholder councils, a mandate for the National Human Rights Institution, and integration of the NAP into other monitoring and review processes, such as an annual State of the Union or the SDGs progress reports. In terms of contents, NAPs should address challenges both at home and across global value chains, including challenges linked to investment involving financial institutions and investors. Reflect a true smart mix approach that adequately covers all the four smart mix dimensions, namely national and international, as well as mandatory and voluntary. No longer ignore the access to remedy pillar, but include clear plans for addressing barriers faced by right holders and improving access to both judicial and no-judicial grievance mechanisms. Emphasize action that strengthen protection to human rights defenders, as well as individuals and groups that are particularly vulnerable to discrimination and business-related human rights abuse. A renewed commitment to the UN Guiding Principles should be high on the G20's agenda in 2020 and to NAPs as key tool for promoting their implementation. We have previously made a number of recommendations to the G20 in 2017 and 2019, calling the G20 to honor previous commitments and for leadership on concrete legal and political steps. In 2020, this should include commitment to mandatory human rights due diligence, where the EU is currently demonstrating leadership role. The UN Guiding Principles 3 pillars, protect, respect, and remedy, that set out how governments and business should put people at the center of how business is done, provide a key reference both in the current global crisis and for the recovery. It is critical that they are not put aside now. The responses to the pandemic and the economic impact must not result in lower standards or even be used as a pretext by governments and business actors to circumvent international human rights obligations and commitments. When the pandemic passes, the recovery period will provide the opportunity to take a more sustainable path forward by putting people and planet at the center. Eventually, making real progress and implementing the guiding principles will better prepare us for the next crisis, not least when turning our collective attention to the climate crisis and other human rights challenges stemming from social injustices and growing inequalities. In all of these efforts, civil society must have the freedom and the capacity to help push states and business to realize the aspirations we have for the people and our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dante. You have spoken within 15 minutes. Thank you very much for cooperating this session. And he touched many aspects of the guiding principle. I still remember it was like yesterday that the guiding principle was adopted in 2011, June, when I was director of Amnesty International, Japan. So 10 years. So I think I didn't expect such a high, how do I say, it's kind of driving force to make a lot of progress in 10 years. Yes, that's true. But at the same time, there are many challenges we are facing to overcome for the next 10 years. So which will be discussed, how civil society could play a role to push this UN guiding principle for the next 10 years. That's kind of theme that we'll be focusing for the rest of this session. Then I would like to invite Pamin to explain a little bit about your experience, how Thailand could launch this national action plan. I'm sure that there must be many things that you didn't expect in a year or so. I was very much surprised that the last November at the UN forum in Geneva, you are very popular among those participants because Thailand was the first country to launch the National Action Plan in Asia. So please, floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting, for giving the opportunity for Thailand to share experience on developing the NAP and also the implementation of the NAP, which I will focus on the multi-stakeholder engagement. So to make everyone understand, so I prepare some presentation. So I'd like to share some the presentation with all of you. Just a minute. Okay. So I prepare so it will be the Thai experience on the NAP and multi-stakeholder engagement. So in Thailand, as everyone aware that we are the first country in Asia to adopt the NAP, but actually we are lucky a little. We are lucky because we got the full support from the top level of the country. So the government has a very strong political commitment in this regard, and we announce human rights as a national agenda and also include business and human rights as one of the key activity under the national human rights agenda. This is to make sure that we will all go together and all will move together and for driving forward the UNGP and also to develop the NAP. So this is the whole picture of the journey of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in Thailand. We start from 2016 when Thailand received a recommendation from Sweden on driving forward the UNGP and developing the NAP. So first thing that we do is that we set up the NAP National Committee. The National Committee comprised of multi-stakeholder as you raised the issue. So we have the representative from state enterprise, the business and also CSO in this national committee. But and also we but the issue of the business human rights is very new for Ministry of Justice. I would say at that time is very new. Although we work on human rights, but we more focus on access to justice. But when we were assigned to work on business and human rights, it's very new for us, and it's also not many CSO approach us to work on this issue. So at the beginning of the first 2 years, we work with only a group of CSO. So the first year that we spend the time, the first year that we start doing the NAP is on 2017, and we start to gather our information on the NAP because we want to learn about the overall situation in the country. And at that time, we work with a group of CSO, and when we conduct the regional consultation at the local level, we will have representative from state, representative from business, and representative from CSO, and a representative from many group of vulnerable group also joined the first year. But then on the second year of doing the NAP on 2018, we have working group on business and human rights visit to Thailand. And at that time, it was we were recommend that we should enhance our network and we should work more with CSO, because at that time we work with only a group of CSO. So we try to be more open. So we open for the second round of regional consultation. And at that time, we hired experts to draft the NAP, and then we come up with a zero draft, and then we went for the second regional consultation in the local at the regional level. And at that time, we opened for the CSO to join the any CSO to join the regional consultation, but there are some challenge among them because some of them don't have money to join, but we also open another channel for them to provide comments, and they can also provide comment through letter and also comment through the website. So they will have an opportunity to provide input to the NAP. And then we have after that we have revised all the zero draft, but we were pushed back a little bit by CSO at that time, because the expert that we hired to draft the zero draft, the zero draft was not what they want and also not a response to their needs. So we were pushed back a little bit by the CSO at that time. So with the ministry, with our team, we try to work it by ourselves. So we kind of throw the zero draft away, and then we start drafting it by ourselves. And then we conduct another round of cluster meeting, another round of consultation with the specific group, with government, with business, with CSO, and with state-owned enterprise, and with the UN agency as well, to get comments and inputs again. And then we make a large list, large shopping list. We've tried to put all the recommendation from different groups, make a list for everyone, and then we consult with everyone that what they want and what can do in reality and what cannot, and what is the point that they satisfy. So, and then we come up with last year we spent time to revise the draft, and then it proposed to the cabinet, and the NAP was adopted in 29 October last year.
You have 2 minutes left.
Yes, sorry. Okay, I will go to the implementation. This is the picture of the whole picture of implementation during the first year. So the first year that we work on, so we are in the first phase of implementation. So multi-stakeholder is still a key to success. So and we work a lot with the business, with the CSO, and with the government. At the central level, we went to to talk with the top level of each ministry to make sure that everyone will implement the NAP. And for the local level, we also talk with the governor of provincial governor, and also talk with the business sector and the CSO in the local area as well, and to make sure that the NAP will be implemented. For the CSO, we are now working on, because human rights defender is one of the key priority under the NAP of Thailand. So we are now working with CSO on studying the possible concrete measure to protect human rights defender and to improve the anti-SLAPP law in the country. And whenever they invite us to share experience or to train them about the NAP, we also went to train them. And also in one of the key achievements during the first year is that we have so we kind of successfully set up the community mediation center to make sure that the case in the area that will be mediated and will be addressed properly. This is the key achievement that we are so far for the first year. And I would like to highlight on the key achievement on human rights defender issue is the proposal of the Amendment of Witness Protection Act to broaden the protection to the human rights defender, apart from, even though they are not the witness in the criminal case, but they can be, if they are feeling that they are at risk of being violated, they can request for the witness for the protection from the state. And also we, as mentioned earlier, I studied concrete measure to protect human rights defender and anti-SLAPP law. And we set up mediation center at community level across the country. And when a human rights defender in each local level can also, you know, address and negotiate with can solve the problem at the local level as well. And what the key challenge in working with the CSO, from my view, is that the lack of understanding on, and also the different perspective on on understanding on the business and human rights issue, and also other related international standard. And each NGO or each CSO has different needs, and we try to be compromised to work on the NAP, to develop the NAP. We have to be compromised, and, you know, try to negotiate with all the multi-stakeholder, and to find the common interest. And the participatory process, no matter how much we open for the CSO to join, it's never enough.
Time is up. Please wrap up.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
And also in Thailand, we have a political stability, and also challenge. A lot of challenge is in the implementation of the NAP. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pami. I'm very sorry to ask you to wrap up in a hasty manner. And Thailand, again, was the first country to launch the NAP. It's not an easy task to come up with, NAP. Just writing up that document, it's easy to, you can finish overnight, but it's not that. You need a lot of work to come up with real good NAP based on the gap analysis, consultation, many things. So thank you very much for leading the NAP in this process. I think we can learn a lot from your experience later on. So thank you very much. I'd like to now ask Felicitas Weber. She's a director Node Chain. I'm sure that a lot of people know the Node Chain, but Node Chain to me is like a first major CSO who used the benchmarking method to ranking the business sectors all over the world. So please, floor is yours.
So thank you, everyone. My name is Felicitas Weber. I'm with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. We're CSO that's working at a global level, and one of the projects we're involved in is Know the Chain. That's a coalition of the 4 partners that you see listed here at the bottom. It's a mix of foundations, civil society organizations, and specialized service providers. And what we're trying to do is really to be a resource for companies, but also for investors to understand and address forced labor risks in their supply chains. And to do that, we are assessing 180 of the largest global companies in sectors where there have been a lot of forced labor cases. So we're looking at the electronic sector, we're looking at the food sector, and we're also looking at the apparel sector. And our aim here is to reward companies that are doing better, but then also to increase risk for those that are really lagging behind. And how do we do this? So we, first of all, look at what companies are telling us that they're doing. So we're looking at corporate disclosure. We're also looking at whether companies are part of multi-stakeholder or industry initiatives that address forced labor. Also pushing those initiatives to be more transparent, to have clear standards, and to hold their members accountable against those standards. But then crucially, we're also looking at information from other CSOs. So looking at publicly available forced labor allegations. And it could be coming from regional or national CSOs. So for example, you'll see here listed a few on this slide, like China Labor Watch or Repórter Brasil, but also from global CSOs, such as Clean Clothes Campaign or Good Electronics, for example. And so we're taking all this information I was talking about, and we are then assessing companies against a methodology that is based on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but very much focused on what companies are doing in their supply chains. And I have here as an example our latest benchmark that was focused on the electronic sector. And what you'll see here, so we're giving each company a score between 0 and 100, and you'll see that, we're really seeing across sectors that some companies have not demonstrated publicly any efforts to address forced labor. Others have made much more significant efforts. But overall, I think the average score is at 30 out of 100. So you see quite a big gap to the top here. And the areas where we're specifically seeing gaps in is when it comes to going beyond of just having policies, but also really looking at implementation of those policies. And then also, going one step further and talking about, okay, we have these policies, we've implemented them, but what are the concrete positive outcomes for workers? And so we can break this information further down at regional level. So we've, in the ICT sector, picked these 3 regions because we had the largest samples of companies. What is quite interesting here that across regions, across sectors, we typically see European companies scoring higher than other regions. In this sector, it was actually a little bit different. But what we can see in this sector and also in other sectors is that across all regions, there's always some companies that show very, very little efforts to address the worst forms of exploitation of workers in supply chains, and others that make much stronger efforts. So really seeing this vast score difference of, between 50 to 70 point difference between the lowest and the highest scoring companies across the regions. And we can break that then down even further. So if we are looking at what does the scoring look like in some of the countries that have national action plans in place. And there are just a few examples listed here. And you see across those, again, I think in all of those, there was always some companies that take really very limited steps to address forced labor risks, and yet others that take much stronger steps. And so that really, talks to this lack of implementation of the national action plan and lack of enforcement or strong monitoring of corporate practices. I think a similar picture can be seen in countries that are developing national action plans, like Japan, for example, where, again, we're sort of seeing quite a strong difference between the sort of lowest and the highest scoring companies. And we hope that this information is then also useful for governments to take this as a starting point of where companies at. I mentioned earlier, we want to certainly reward companies that are doing better, but also increase risks for the laggards to really generate action. And part of how we do that is that we're working with global investors. We have at the moment 160 global investors that are supporting us, that hold shares in these companies that we're assessing and going into engagement dialogues or putting out shareholder resolutions to ask their investee companies to improve their human rights practices. And when we then look at how do companies improve over time, we're typically seeing what is quite encouraging, that the vast majority of companies do improve. For example, in the electronics sector, we have seen...
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have seen 80% of the companies have improved. And here are some examples of that on the theme of recruitment, for example, where we're looking at our companies making sure that migrant workers don't get exploited in the process of being recruited, and where they had to pay really high recruitment fees of several months of their wages, is that paid back. So it is really encouraging that that number, for example, doubled from 5 to 10 companies. But on the other hand, you also see one of our challenges, which is that we're quite often starting at a very low baseline. And also we're seeing that, while most companies improve, they typically sort of take a few steps to improve rather than take a ginormous leap forward to really up their game. And maybe just to finish with some of the challenges, I think while we're taking a lot of the information from other CSOs, we're working with investors, we're putting the information to companies and multi-stakeholder initiatives, and we've seen strong improvements. There's also still significant areas of gaps where the NAPs could really fill that gap, which is one of the areas is purchasing practices, for example, that where we've seen even where companies strengthen their standards and ask their suppliers to do more, for example, to make sure that the employer pays for recruitment fees, we're typically not seeing these policies integrated into purchasing practices. So we're not seeing price premiums for these suppliers or longer term contract that actually allow suppliers to implement those practices. And we're also, I think Dante was mentioning the lack of remediation. We're seeing very little remediation. So just an example is the 14 companies in the ICT sector where we found concrete allegations, only 3 reported on concrete remedy outcomes for victims. And also when we are looking at the worker voice theme more broadly and looking at how companies ensure that there's effective grievance mechanisms in place or that workers can organize and collectively bargain, this is an area where companies typically still fall short and where national action plans could play a really important role. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Felicitas. Wonderful presentation. I remember that when you first working on the benchmarking process, I was kind of curious what could be the significant point to turn out from the benchmarking. Now, I think it's a lot of business companies just following this index or this know the chain outcome of this your research. So I think there has been some improvement since you began this benchmarking process. And I think index and is a very much fair and objective, I think, to judge what we have done. Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to ask Akiko Sato-san, is that okay? To present your presentation. Thank you very much.
So thank you for inviting me for this important panel. And it's my great pleasure to be here with the colleagues. So today I'd like to talk about some of my experience as CSO, the Human Rights Node, which already the kindly introduced by the chair, the Hideki-san, the Tokyo-based human rights NGO. So we've been working on business human rights for certain years, and what I'd like to share today is what we have learned from our experience for improving the multi-stakeholder engagement in line with UNGP, while pushing our government forward to have their meaningful NAP. So the first example is about actually the Thai case. So the Thai the labor rights violation in Thai chicken industry. So perhaps some of you may know this case because it is quite well known, but this is the case about labor rights violation of migrant workers from Myanmar in Thai chicken factory. And actually at that time, like in 2016 or 17, I lived in Thailand. And at that time, I remember that this news was covered by international media a lot. But actually, not so many Japanese companies were aware of that case, even though eventually it turned out that some of the Japanese companies there have the concrete linkage between the case throughout the supply chains. So what we have done for this case is by collaborating with the local NGOs in Thailand and to publish the report in Japanese. Actually, this is the report in English, but we published the report in Japanese as well to point out the connection between this case and Japanese companies. And what surprised me a lot is after published this report in Japanese, a lot of the private sector, the Japanese companies, and proactively work on this case. So, like some companies they conducted the country visit to Thailand to have the dialogue with some relevant actors, including international organizations, and also that we found that the companies that mentioned this case on the sustainability or the ESG report next year to say that they identified this case as one of the human rights risk. So what we have learned from this case is to have the meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement. I think having the enough information is one of the keys. And in this regard, at this moment, in Japanese context, Japanese companies do not have enough information on what is happening on the ground, which is the link to their supply chain. So as a CSO, to provide the information on the what's going on the ground by collaborating with the regional CSO. It's their significant their action that they can lead the private sector to move forward regarding the UNGP. And the second example is about the research that we've done, like the one the Felicitas they explained. So Felicitas they explained quite well about the chain, and we think that kind of benchmark is really the key action to make the companies the work on business and human rights. But there are some companies, even though they are making a lot the influence in the economic sector, but are not the benchmark yet. So that we pick up the companies which are well known in Japanese context, but since the business area is too large, that those companies are not benchmarked in any like international well-known benchmarks. So what we did is to send the questionnaires in line with UNGP to some big trading companies to see to what extent they are conducting the actions on human rights policies or human rights due diligence. And after receiving the answers from these companies, that we have published based on the outcome and make the kind of chart to compare the companies. So after publishing this report, which actually drew the high attention from not only CSO as well as but also the private sector, including investors, because they think that this kind of comparison is also very useful for them to see where is a kind of the leverage, the point that even the private investors or CSOs, when they try to have the engagement with the private sector. So you can see there the three colors in this chart. So the green means that their practice is in line with UN guiding principle, and yellow is so-so, and the red is the two left behind. So you can see that some are doing a bit forward, but some are quite left behind. So I think that this kind of the peer pressure is also could be a driver to push the private sectors forward in implementing the human rights policies or human rights due diligence. And also for CSOs, this kind of the information that can be a tool to have the engagement with the private sector. And the third example is the issues ongoing issues in China. So they're about the forced labor that alleged in the Uyghur region. I don't think that I need to explain the details of the case, but what I want to share with you is that there among the case in relation to business and human rights, there are some cases that is important, that is a bit hard for private sector. Okay, thank you. Some cases are difficult for private sector to address by only themselves. So I think for such cases, it is crucial for private sectors, but also the CSO to have the multi-stakeholder engagement to seek for effective and meaningful remedies or any kind of the solutions that can be which they can be seen. So for this case, we are working with a global alliance and to raise awareness of these issues in Japanese the society as well as the companies. So to conclude the brief presentation, I think that based on the experience that I think that there are some significant roles as CSOs in implementing the UNGP. So first, the point is to promote awareness raising of business human rights among the civil society, the companies, which is obvious. And the second, their role is to point out some practices to be improved and founders throughout supply chain to clarify the gap between the existing policies and situation on the ground. And the last point is to share experience and challenges with CSOs across the globe to tackle the common issues and set up certain standards reflecting the regional aspect as well. So that is what we have learned there based on our experience, and I hope these the experience can can make some impact, or they can reach to the effective multi-stakeholder engagement in the future. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Akiko-san, for the wonderful presentation. I just heard another kind of language barrier for the Japanese company not to read the English text. And also I am very interested in knowing that in general, Japanese company very much keen to learn what others can do. It's just comparison to always looking at what other, in the same field. So it's very interesting presentation. Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Benjamin from Africa. As you know that Africa is very much affluent in natural resources, gas and rare metal, oil. And I have seen many human rights violations back in 1990s. So I also learned from, for example, Niger Delta kind of things. So I'd like to, looking forward to hearing your presentation from the African perspective. Thank you.
So thank you very much for having me on this panel. I was asked to speak about the African civil society engagement with business and human rights in general. And specifically, I would like to share with you today ACA's experience on the African continent regarding these issues. ACA stands for African Coalition for Corporate Accountability. I would just start because we are racing against time. I won't take too much time for my own introduction. I'm Benjamin Traoré. I'm the project coordinator for ACA, and ACA Secretariat sits in Pretoria at the Center for Human Rights, which is one of our members. So in terms of a very brief presentation of ACA, ACA is a coalition of about 130 civil society organizations across Africa. So ACA was launched in 2013, so it's a very young organization. Just 7 years ago we have been launched, and we have members. Please, if we can move on the. We have members from almost all African regions, so Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, North Africa. Even if we don't have many members in that part of the continent, we are, in touch with some organizations also there lately, and we think that our presence in the northern part of the continent will be increased in the coming years. Yeah, so I would say in terms of context and the reason why we felt the need to create this organization and what is its mandate. So ACA was created based on the need to fill some regulatory gaps, huge regulatory gaps, actually, I must say. As you know, Africa is probably the continent where corporate abuse and corporate impunity has manifest themselves in a very extreme manner, in an extreme manner. This is due to the fact that it's very well known that, and Ekedi mentioned it just before I started, that Africa has plenty of natural and mineral resources, and also to the fact that African countries has been called over the last last 30 years, even last 40 years, many African countries has been asked to open their countries to business. So this has, led to a lot of investment, private investment, but the increasing of this economic activity also goes with a lot of challenges in terms of human rights, respect for human rights, but also for the environment. So what are our main working streams? So ACCA has 4 main areas of work. The first one is free, prior, and informed consent. So as you know, this is a very important principle. And in Africa especially, the African human rights system has developed a very particular interpretation of FPIC, acknowledging or recognizing this principle not only for indigenous people at it is recognized at the international level, but also for all communities. And this has been a very progressive way to understand FPIC, and ACCA is particularly attached to this interpretation, because we think that all communities have a say when they are affected by business projects that concern their livelihood. So we are also working on access to remedy, which this is one of the most important pillar of the UNGPs, as you know. ACCA is also engaged in the treaty process. I will just mention very quickly later on why ACCA consider that the treaty process is also important in the current framework. We have decided also lately to add Chinese investment in Africa on the list of our working stream. In terms of operational strategies, how do we work? What do we do concretely? So the first thing that we
Benjamin,
work
2 minutes. Sorry,
okay.
2 minutes.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So yes, so we basically do a lot of sharing experience, research-based research based on evidence on the ground, policy advocacy, capacity building, and also promoting national implementation of international instruments regarding business and human rights. So I will quickly move to the next slide, please. So what have been done in terms of UNGPs and national action plans? So ACCA has embraced UNGPs since its inception in 2013. But also ACCA thinks that UNGPs, the way they are framed today and the way they are understood, are not strong enough to face the challenges that communities and civil society organizations in Africa are facing that are related to business operations. So despite that, ACCA members have been promoting the national implementation of UNGPs across the continent. But unfortunately, as you know, and as Dante has mentioned before, many African countries do not or have not engaged meaningfully in this process to date. The only African country actually that has adopted a national action plan is Kenya. However, some other countries are in the process of developing.
Benjamin, time is up. Could you wrap up your presentation?
Okay, so very quickly, I was saying that some other countries are in the process of developing their national plans, and our members are also pushing for that. And in terms of, just to conclude, in terms of lesson learned, I think Africa has still a lot to do in terms of dealing with business abuses on the continent. ACCA is working with its membership to advance this agenda, and especially we are very soon, we will be launching also a campaign in terms of how UNGPs can be implemented through national action plans in many African countries. So this is very generally what I can say about ACCA and what we are doing on the African continent. I'm very sorry, this is very brief and we cannot go into many details, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Benjamin. I'm very sorry that I couldn't give you enough time to explain what ACCA has been doing. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for explaining, giving us a good, nice presentation to all of us. So now Q&A time, and we have less than 30 minutes, and I'd like to take some questions, but it's very hard to pick up the good question. Before picking up this question, I'd like to ask maybe Dante. Could you a little bit explain about what the smart mix? I have seen many NAP just encouraging, making progress on the human rights duties, something, kind of thing. But at the same time, mandatory measure could be needed. Could you explain a little bit about the process? What would be the best mix when we start national action plan? I think this is very useful before taking up some other questions.
Yes, well, very, very shortly about that. And actually, Pami, to a certain extent, mentioned how the smart mix can look like, because what we have been advocating is that it's an incremental approach. So a national action plan at the very first stage can have more voluntary measures and administrative decisions made by government, but at the same time learn from where gaps lay and be able to develop a higher playing field, level playing field, but at a higher level. And that requires actions that might look or should look like a regulatory mandatory framework. So what we're saying basically is what works better to achieve the outcomes we need, and learn by doing, and learn from the lessons learned and share with others, other governments, other countries, and what is actually working on the field. So who has to judge are the impacted people, the most vulnerable, the workers, the defenders, what works better for them. And if a voluntary approach is not fulfilling the commitments made or is not achieving the goals and the outcomes that we need, of course, we need to explore other means. And in Western Europe, what we are seeing with the push for mandatory human rights due diligence that is attracting a wide range of support, not only from civil society and unions, which was something expected, but also from a variety of business, calling for a level playing field in which companies that are ahead of the curve, doing the right thing, learning by doing, improving their practices, are not afraid to say, we need governments to step in, to regulate, to establish minimum requirements that are higher for everyone, and to avoid free riders and laggards to actually get away from not doing their part. So the smart mix depends on the context in each country, in each region of the world, but basically is moving in the direction of making sure that we have the right outcomes, and the right outcomes in function of the people which rights, the right holders, that their rights might be affected. So it's somehow a pragmatic approach to say, but in function of outcomes, that's the point. So effectiveness of implementation. If a more voluntary approach shows that it works, it's fine. But what we are seeing is that the voluntary approach has practical limitations. It doesn't go far enough. It doesn't get us where we want to be, and it doesn't block the free riders from being free riders. Therefore, there are good arguments and good reasons to level that playing field.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Pamin, do you have any additional comments besides what the Dan said about this issue?
Yes, yes. In Thailand, we use a kind of smart mix as well, because in Thailand, as I mentioned, we have 4 key priority area, and in each area we have action plan for only for government. We have specific indicate the activities, responsible agencies, time frame, linkage with the SDG and national strategy. But that the mandatory is only for the government. But for business, actually at the beginning, we would like to do the kind of mandatory as well. But when we have a consultation with business sector, they don't want something to, force them. So we decide to use we decide to just set expectation for the business. So if you see the Thai NAP, you see in the second pillar of Thai NAP, you will see that we have a list of expectation for the business.
Okay, thank you very much. Very useful. And I have many questions from the floor. I can see that which one is there is little letters, and but there's some question about to the Felicitas, because we have a very big issue on small SME and MME, how we could introduce guiding principle to implement this principle. And the question is, how are tools like a node chain made widely available to company in SME and MME sectors, which I think it's too small to for you node chain to judge those kind of companies.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and certainly one we're grappling with ourselves. I think there's a few different ways how we're trying to do that. I think we are, first of all, expanding the numbers of companies we're looking at. So we started with 20 in each sector. We're now expanded to 60. In some sectors, that means we still just only getting the biggest, and others we're actually going, to the sort of medium-sized enterprises already. But, there'll only ever be a certain number of companies we can assess. So we are also trying to engage quite a lot with industry initiatives and their members to make sure our tools are available to them and they're aware of them. We've also been, I think that, issue was mentioned by you, but also by Akiko, just translated a number of our documents into 7 different languages now, just so that it is available for SMEs or others that might not necessarily have an English language speaker in-house. And we've also come up with a subset of indicators to specifically assess some of the smaller companies, because we felt that even actually when we go to the largest global companies, we still always saw that there are some that just haven't really taken any steps. And if we come with this gigantic methodology, it can be quite overwhelming for those companies. So we've come up with a subset of 10 indicators that actually reflects quite well the full methodology to just assess some of the smaller companies. And I think that's something that some of the SMEs can hopefully take forward as well. And we've also heard from some, not necessarily SMEs, but other companies that have taken that aren't in our benchmark, that have taken the methodology and used it to assess themselves against it. So we hope that SMEs can do that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe I'd like to ask Akiko-san about what you have learned from those speakers when you see the new national action plan will be launched by the Japanese government, which been a little bit delayed. But do you have any comments from those experience that's been explained?
Thank you very much. So I think Hideki-san and also the Kunnarilak knows it very well, but as a CSOs, we've been stressed, a bit frustrated about the process that the Japanese government is implementing, particularly about their engagement with stakeholders. So even though that there are the working group and also the committee for the NAP, which I'm also involved in, but still I think their composition is quite limited actually. But it is not only, I could say to be fair, it's not only because of the weakness of their government, but also their as CSO, we should work on more to raise awareness within civil society as well. But still, when we look at the first draft NAP, this is not not like human rights issues on the ground. There has been addressed. So I think we can learn a lot from what the Kanadarak shared, that eventually having the conversation they're having the candid conversation with stakeholders also they mean a lot for government to to make them easier to implement the NAP, and eventually the human rights situation or the social the issues that could be improved. So I hope that our government they will learn again from the Thai government, and also maybe they're by collaborating with the regional the CSOs as well as the regional governments to have more the wider the approach to in implementing the UN guiding principle.
Thank you very much. And just one question to Pami again. The question is why the Thai government pay attention to the involvement of CSO in the first place? I mean, why the involvement of CSO is important for the drafting process of the NAP in Thailand. In your presentation, I heard that CSO pushed back a little bit on the first draft. Could you a little bit explain about this?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think the first thing that we have to keep in mind is that we have to see CSO as a partner, not the enemy, because as I mentioned earlier, the NAP when at first time when Ministry of Justice was assigned to responsible for drafting the NAP, it is very new for us. So we need the actual information on the ground. So we went on regional consultation, and CSO must be involved in that, because we cannot just get information from our local office without listening to CSO, because that may be not the fact or not true in the area, in the locality. We need to listen to the fact in the locality. We have to listen to both sides and every side. And we work as partner with CSO, both the drafting process until the implementation process. In drafting process, they are part of our panelists, and they are part of and they are also joined the workshop to brainstorm and to evaluate the situation in each region. And also we provide them with opportunity to send the feedback inputs through the letter, through the website. We even open for the feedback on NAP 3 rounds. During the process, we open it for 3 rounds, and they ask us, CSO asked us to extend the deadline. So we extend for them, and we try to include all the recommendation as much as we can. And we have to try to compromise, bring the recommendation from CSO and negotiate with the government at which level they're acceptable for both sides. And also at the implementation level, we are also invite CSO to be part of our speaker every time when we conduct training to business sector, so then business can listen to the reality, because sometimes they work in the office, they don't know the facts, and they don't know what happened outside of their office. So when we invite CSO to join our session, they are very interesting, and they can bring back some thought in the session and improve their work. And also I would like to highlight that in Thailand, we have the Business and Human Rights Award, which is this year is the first year that we award the NGO, the CSO as well. So the CSO that work on this issue so this year is the first year that we have this. Last year, the first year we have award, but last year the category of the award is only for the state enterprise and for the business. But this year we have extend to another area is for CSO. And the Freedom Story in northern part of Thailand, in Chiang Rai, got this award because they work on human trafficking and they work in implementing the NAP. So the role of CSO is not only to monitor the implementation of NAP. It's not only to monitor the implementation of NAP, but they can help implementation, like awareness raising, as Kun Akiko said, they can help on awareness raising activity as well, and they will help support the implementation on the process as well. And because we work a lot with CSO. So now I think the relationship between the Ministry of Justice and the government with CSO is kind of improving. Like I mentioned earlier, we have set up the mediation center at local level. So whenever the CSO in each area has some problem, we negotiate and talk together in the mediation center. And sometimes, as Kunagiko mentioned about the human rights defender, sometimes about the slap case in Thailand, which is quite a number, quite a lot in Thailand. So we together, the CS, just one sentence. The CSO like inform us about that they want us to observe the case in the court or provide them with protection. So it's kind of make us get closer in provide a service or protection to the CSO as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question: have you talked to the Japanese government about the, creation of the NAP?
I do it one last year. In the earlier this year, I went to Japan and have a session. Have a session, and with the government also joined that session as well, right, Akiko? I think the government of Japan is also joined, and we once just talked on the web on the exchange email as well.
Thank you very much. We have only 10 minutes left. I'd like to ask each panelist to wrap up or give us some, what would be the next step to improve our role of the civil society to push guiding principle. But Benjamin, do you have anything in your mind that you didn't tell us in your presentation? Very much, very quick. I think you have something that in your mind that you would like to tell us. What's you didn't unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Diki. So yes, I think it's important, especially in the African context, to mention that we have still a lot of challenges. I think the most important thing for civil society organizations is first of all, to get familiar with the international narrative, the international instruments around business and human rights. And this is really challenging because we have many civil society organizations that are not even clearly aware of the existence of the UNGPs actually in Africa. So in many African countries as well, governments are still, in a very backward conceptions around business and human rights, where we just speak very, very briefly about corporate social responsibility, and that's it. We don't speak about anything else. So I think this is the main challenge, getting people together to speak the same language. And I think the UNGPs, that is what they have done, at least in a very consensual way. We can agree on the fact that they have created a rhetoric that we need to embrace. That's something. But as I mentioned before, also we have some concern about the character, the soft character of the UNGPs. That's the reason why many of our members actually are engaged in the treaty process. That is something I wanted to explain. I didn't finally. But yes, many of our members are engaged in the treaty process, and they feel that there is a strong need to go beyond these voluntary measures or soft measures, even if the UNGPs have been considered as making a smart mix. So we in Africa, civil society organization feel in general that this is not enough. And that's the reason why many are engaged in the treaty process. And lastly, maybe we need to engage more with businesses in Africa, with corporations. And I think that's something also which is lacking. And I think this for the year to come, that's something we will be more working on. That's what I can say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. maybe among the CSO in the world, we could share our experience each other to learn each other. This kind of things that we should do more, I think. I'm just curious to know in your presentation, there's one line, Chinese cases, business cases you're working, but which
Yes,
we don't have time to,
and yes,
ask
and
you
what's
step by.
interesting actually with Chinese investment in Africa and our work on it is that we have some Chinese civil society organizations as partner on this, which is something very, it's unprecedented. But yes, we are working with some Chinese civil society that are also pressuring Chinese government on specific issues. And yeah, that's very interesting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm.
Okay, now we have 7 minutes to the end. And I'd like to ask each of your panelists to wrap up what would be the next step achieving the business and human rights based on the UNGPS. I heard a lot the UNGPS is kind of driving force, well balanced for the government, business, and CSO. Nobody could deny the UNGPS. I think it's kind of a driving force that we should keep in mind to 10 years from now, what we could do about it to achieve the best practice and achieve the human rights. So I'd like to ask who goes first? No? Maybe Dante has been waiting for this turn. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Well, the working group is in the process of evaluating the first 10 years, and we are engaging in the north and the south and the west and in the east, from learning from what has worked well, not so well, shortcomings, lessons learned, etc. So we have a big consultation in Africa lining up with ACA, in fact, to capture that perspective. And we're building momentum towards June 2021 we're having an honest conversation, claiming victory where there is victory to be claimed, the half full part of the glass, and understanding the challenges and what are the triggers and what should happen to unleash the full potential of the guiding principles looking into the next decade. So we will be moving from measures that are more in the voluntary area into more mandatory area in the smart mix approach. And that is very clear what's happening in Europe. But also the value of participation and the multi-stakeholder approach, including the voices from civil society, but also from the rights holders directly, because the outcome is better. When you have participation, you have a better understanding of the challenges, also the opportunities, and also ownership on the solutions. So it's becoming very clear for some governments and for many and growing number of business that actually participation, listening to the people and the right holders, having honest conversations, sometimes difficult conversations, drive into better outcomes, both for public policy setting and implementation, but also for business competitiveness. So the win-win situation is something that it is possible. And we're very excited to see that in this process of evaluating the stock taking of 10 years and the roadmap into the future, we have been able to convene from big business and industry associations to unions, to indigenous people, to civil society, and many governments and a growing number of governments that are clustering behind this proposition to take ownership, to broaden the umbrella, to make the right connections with the SDGs, climate change, etc., and to raise the level of ambition into the next 10 years. So actually, I'm very excited about that. And I think we have a good prospect to recognize where we have gone and how far we have gone and all the shortcomings, but be able to be more ambitious in this platform today, in this conversation that is, in fact, multi-stakeholder to a great extent, is actually an indication that we can do better if we do it together, and if we can actually be able to find the common ground, we have the common ground, and build the future based on participation.
Okay,
thank you again for the invitation, Hideki.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next person, who is going next? Pami.
Hi. Okay. Thank you.
1 minute.
To me, I think we need to join hand with all the multi-stakeholder, because national action plan is something for all, not only on the work of the governments, but the government as well as other sector has to join hand and work together. One of the key highlights for Thailand next year is to set up the Business and Human Rights Academy. I think our goal is clear for Dante and Akiko. No, our goal for the government is clear, that we want to be the champion of Asia, of ASEAN. Actually, we aim for ASEAN, but maybe for Asia is fine, if possible for Asia. But we will set up the Business and Human Rights Academy to be a kind of the knowledge hub for the region. And also, we usually every year we provide training to ASEAN people, and also we join hand with UN agency in Thailand to organize the Business and Human Rights Week at the second week of June every year. And it's a forum that everyone can join and also share experience among the region. But now I think the UN country team try to extend to broader than ASEAN. So it's good for all of us. So I'm happy also to see everything like improving. But for the work with CSO, I would like to encourage everyone, I mean every government to work with the CSO. If you really want to address the problem, you need to work with CSO.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, who goes next? Benjamin, your last.
Yes, thank you very much. Very quickly, I would say, yes, it's very important as from a civil society perspective. It's very important that we make this move from voluntary measures, soft measure, to more mandatory measures. This is what civil society is looking for, but I think this is also what communities and individuals that are affected by business operations are expecting. So this is what we are doing in ACA, and we will continue taking into consideration views from all the stakeholders. And I think, as Dante mentioned before, this discussion is a very nice opportunity to see that how we can all come together and speak the same language, even from different perspectives. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Benjamin. Akiko-san. Okay.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the very important and interesting discussion here. So I'd like to highlight the importance again of the strengthening the collaboration among the region and also the sectors. So as I mentioned, the awareness raising, the level of awareness raising among CSOs in Japan is not so quite high. So I think that I strongly believe that we need to work together with other like a CSO, for example, like a CSOs working on environmental issues, for instance, and we need to, work with the regional, the active CSOs as well to, share our experience and challenges there, as I mentioned. So that I think that there are a lot of things to be done to implement the UNGP along with the coming NAP. So I look forward to working with you. They're all together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Akiko-san. Felicitas, please.
Thanks very much. Love to have the last word. Just wanted to echo, what others have said. I think CSOs can certainly do, more in terms of working together, also across regions. A lot of the work what ACA has shown as well. I did want to go back to a point that Dante raised earlier, though, that there are just significant power dynamics, and civil society organization and human rights defenders have a lot less powers than companies and many governments, and that we have to recognize that, we have to address that. And I think therefore mandatory human rights due diligence has to be part of a smart mix of solutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't know how many participants were listening to this panel, but thank you very much for joining. I think this is a C20 summit. A lot of CSO people are attending this session. There has been enough commitment, declaration within the G20 in the past, especially the one in Germany is a very strong, very good commitment. So I think enough commitment, but it's now time to do it. Just do it and try to do better. It's it depends on us, our interest, our work, our attention, and collaboration is the key word you mentioned among the civil sector in the world. And thank you very much. We will keep discussing this issue. Thank you very much again. All panelists, applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.